Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. This video is going to be quite the hot take, I'm fairly certain. So currently, we're in the middle of patch 11.1.7, which means we're quite far out from the release of Undermine and not quite yet at the Koresh patch. Clearly one of those points in the expansion's lifespan where lots of players may choose to dip out. And as such, Blizzard has been flinging tons of micro-content at us in a very staggered fashion. One of the most recent of which, lasting through the month of July, is the Diablo event, and as part of that, the Collector's Bounty buff. As soon as this was discovered on the PTR, I had a not-so-ecstatic reaction to it, and now that it's live, we know exactly how it works. All dungeons and raids from Shadowlands and earlier drop twice as much regular loot. In addition, legendary items and mounts from those sources have a 5% increased drop chance. That is to say, for a 1% drop, it now has a 6% drop chance, not a 1.05% drop chance. Time locking content does not benefit from this. And the general reaction to this has been widespread praise. Players and collectors love their rare drops, so everybody being able to do their farms about 6 times as efficiently is seen as an absolute win. Heck, Blizzard should just leave the drop rates like this permanently, right? Well, I'm gonna represent the minority of players here who actually kind of hates this event. I am the grumpy old fuddy that wants to gatekeep his 20-year-old pixels. And to be clear, if you are happy about this event or have benefited from it, I bear no ill will towards you. I'm happy that you've received something that makes you happy. I myself benefited from it. Of the 3 mounts with an increased drop chance that I still needed, I managed to see 2 of them drop in the first week of the event and the last one in the second week. But I am still opposed to the event being a thing in the first place. It is the latest in a long history of Blizzard choosing to devalue past accomplishments in order to drum up excitement and keep players active. First, I wish to go over why it even bugs me, then I'll address arguments from the other side and my responses to them. Then I'll cover some of the more memorable past instances of this devaluation occurring, and lastly I'll speak as to if this even really matters much. So to begin, why am I not a fan of trivializing these farms? Well, for starters, it literally does diminish the communal value of those rewards. A point which I think many people would disagree with. Who cares if somebody else has something or not? And to an extent, even I agree. Believe me when I say I couldn't care less about your Reddit post about obtaining a dead pony that 17% of players already own. But I think many are too quick to throw aside the value of items that can instill envy in others. Anyone who played back before the time of transmog, particularly during vanilla, can probably relate to the experience of being a relative noob and seeing a player decked out in full raid tier, and how seeing that made you want to accomplish something similar with your own character. And who hasn't at least once or twice gotten a whisper from a random player complimenting you on some cool or rare item that you're rocking? Yes, with transmog it's incredibly easy for everyone now to look cool all the time. Yes, with over 1,000 mounts, there aren't a lot that really have that wow factor anymore, and old raid mounts certainly aren't among them, but still, I don't think they need to be handed out like candy either. It's like when Legion rolled around and every ret paladin in the world suddenly had the Ashbringer. Every enhancement shaman had Doomhammer. I'm sure many players loved it, but at the same time, it kind of made those mythical weapons of lore feel kind of lame. There's also the issue of this event making me feel colossally stupid for having spent so much time farming these mounts in the past. While it's true that if I enjoyed the experience at the time that it's still ultimately worth it, you can't tell me that it doesn't suck a little bit knowing that if I'd waited, I would have only had to have farmed Tomb of Sargeras 85 times instead of 508. No, of course I'm a bit salty. That's 423 runs I could have avoided. But sure, clearly it was worth it to me to farm them at the time. Fair enough, I suppose. Instead of looking to the past though, let us gaze into the future. Because the Collector's Bounty precedent has been set, and the event could return in the future, I'm automatically gonna feel like a moron if I continue to farm those drops outside of the event. Like I have since started my Dawn of the Infinite farm because that was next on my to-do list. But while running it, I couldn't help but ask myself, what am I doing here? If I just wait a year, I'll probably save myself a ton of time. Is this the mentality Blizzard wants to foster? That we shouldn't want to do old content because it'll be massively more efficient later on? A similar issue popped up with the Trading Post 2nd anniversary sale a few months back. Many items returned, and a good number of them were discounted to cost less tenders. Tenders are a limited resource, so by selling the same items but now for less, you kind of screwed over everyone who bought those items in earlier months. And I'm saying this as someone who got 4 or so returning mounts this way since I missed the first 7 or 8 months of the Trading Post. I shouldn't have gotten them for less. I don't deserve those extra attendees. Now then, there are a lot of perfectly valid arguments for why gatekeeping these accomplishments and drops is dumb and pointless. And you know, for most of these arguments, I don't even disagree. It's usually not a case of one side being right and the other being wrong, but rather two sides who appreciate and value different things. So, from the top, we have, why do other people have to suffer as much as you did in the past? And this is often compared to real-life concerns, such as when people from older generations sometimes complain that kids these days have it too easy with everything handed to them, and they don't know how hard it was back in the day. And my response to that is, well, WoW is a video game. The mindset is a bad one to hold in real life because the consequences of that keep people living paycheck to paycheck and having to live in constant fear of one medical emergency bankrupting them. The consequences of wanting things to maintain their challenge or rarity in a video game is that people have to play a video game more. Oh, the horror. If you still think they should be easier to get, then that's fine. But it isn't a moral failing to want things to be hard or require some dedication or luck. Another argument I hear is, you've had it for 10 plus years. I think you can let other people have it finally. To which I say, in the bulk of cases, there is absolutely nothing stopping those players from going back and getting them today in the exact same way that others have been getting them during those 10 plus years. It almost feels like those players are gatekeeping themselves from the activity. There's also the assertion that rare drops aren't an accomplishment anyway. They're just luck. And in isolation, I agree. But when you take a whole bunch of rare drops and average them out, the luck factor basically disappears. There will be drops you get way before you expect, and drops that take way longer. But if you take them all in aggregate, RNG gets flattened and it becomes a work of dedication. Perhaps you think that dedication to a trivially difficult task isn't something that deserves unique rewards, but make sure you're aware that that's the argument you're making. And I would add that we're playing an MMORPG. Extreme dedication to trivially difficult tasks is sort of baked into the DNA of the game. A similar point that gets raised is that the guaranteed mount drops from killing mythic end bosses already have their rewards trivialized, because what start out as a reward for skill becomes a grind that anybody can pull off. To which I say, you are absolutely correct, and I can respect the argument that these mounts should become unobtainable with the release of the next raid or the next expansion. That's not my preference, and I think reducing it from a guaranteed drop to a 1% drop is a fair trade-off. I would also add that this has pretty much been the standard since Memoron's head back in Wrath of the Lich King. There are other skill check mounts from dungeons and raids that have been removed permanently, such as the Amani Warbear or the Crusaders Warhorses, but I don't think the mythic end boss mounts have ever functioned differently than they currently do. The last argument to address is that events like this save people who have been running these places for over a decade without seeing the drop. And to this, I call BS. First of all, I don't really believe those people exist because very few ever provide actual kill counts. You're telling me that you've been making a dedicated effort to farm these mounts on a decent roster of characters for 10 years? Let's say that an item has a 1% drop rate, and for whatever cockamamie reason, you only ever farm on one character. If you did even just that consistently for 10 years, that's 520 attempts, which is surprisingly close to the total for my Abyss Worm attempts. Out of 100,000 people who do that, only 537 players would not have seen the drop, 0.5%. Adding even just a second character gives you 1,040 attempts, at which point only 3 players out of the 100,000 would still be missing it. And for this reason, I can get on board with the argument that rare drops should be guaranteed after a certain point. I think 1,000 kills for a 1% drop would be a good metric to go by. Because yeah, at that point you are a huge statistical outlier and have clearly put in the effort. So when people say they've been farming something for 10 years, I have to assume that they just run a place on occasion every few weeks or months on maybe a small handful of characters, and then they stop trying again for a while, which ends up spreading out their farm over a huge span of time. And second of all, if we're to argue that clearly all those extra runs were worth it to me because I did them, can we not make the same argument that players still farming will only engage in extra runs if it's worth it to them? Let's not use double standards here. So, those are the rationales behind the crotchety grump crowd that I belong to, and the much larger crowd that loves getting these things more easily. I feel most people probably won't be swayed to the other side by any of these arguments. You're gonna feel how you feel, probably based on your gut reaction alone, but I hope we can all at least understand where others are coming from. With that in mind, I just want to touch on some significant devaluations that I can recall. A fairly minor one that has also affected dungeon and raid mount drops was the decision to include these rare drops as a potential reward from the time-walking raid caches for Black Temple, Ulduar, and Firelands. These are still RNG and require you to join a group to mostly plow through undertuned content, but it certainly requires more effort than simply blitzing the places on your own. I do think it's a shame that this category of drop is being hit the hardest because it's some of the simplest downtime content Blizz can generate, so why diminish it like this? Additionally, many, though not all, reputations have been severely hit by this. There have been recent occasional events that straight up double rep gains for the War Within and triple rep gains for Dragonflight. Funnily enough, I find the War Within ones more reasonable because at least that's benefiting players working on them as current content. Now, ultimately, for renowned factions, it isn't a huge deal, as these can usually be maxed out pretty passively just by playing. But even so, triple rep gains, are you serious? And whenever an expansion gets added to time walking, you can very easily cheese a bunch of the reputations through rep tokens, purchasable for cheap using time warped badges. Blizz, I don't get it. Why don't you want players doing your old content? It's baffling to me. At the end of Shadowlands and into early Dragonflight, we had quite the surge of mount devaluations. When Evokers became playable, the drop rate of world boss mounts for them was bugged, such that Evokers weren't valid recipients of normal loot, but with the mounts dropping at a pretty dang good rate. Instead of revoking those drops or patching it and letting those early souls to be lucky, they changed the mounts to just be 1% drops in general. A good move that would have been far nicer back in Mists of Pandaria and not a decade later when players may have racked up thousands of kills for the 1 in 2,000 drops, or dropped millions of gold at the black market auction house. At the same time, Blizz was throwing a bunch of old TCG rewards out there as Twitch drops. While I do think it was a good move to actually add another way to get these rewards, they could have done something a little less insultingly lazy than watching someone else play the game. The sense of futility I felt in the wake of these changes was one of probably 3 main reasons that I stepped away from the game for the first half of Dragonflight. Was it petty on my end? I mean, yeah, probably. But it is what it is. Mop Remix took pretty much every rare drop from that expansion, including the already massively nerfed world boss mounts, and took an absolute dump on any semblance of rarity. Pretty much everything from Mop other than challenge mode rewards became purchasable from a vendor with just a few hours of effort. And this one I really don't understand. There was no shortage of new rewards. Heck, in mounts alone, we got 32 recolors that could have been adjusted to cost significantly more. People still would have grinded them out, and I have little doubt that Legion Remix will similarly make a joke of any of its rare drops. This next one is pretty trivial, but the Faceless One title from soloing 5 masks in Horrific Visions returned with Horrific Visions Revisited. It wasn't the hardest thing to earn even back in the day with a properly maxed out cloak, but it is still notable as a reward that was quote-unquote removed forever, only to come back. And much more vaguely, huge swaths of the game's rewards kind of just passively become easier to obtain over time. either because you outleveled the difficulty or systemic changes wind up having a big impact. I know there were some changes around WoD that made many rare items drop for every member of the party present, which has led to absurd screenshots of full groups getting time lost proto Drake and the like. The reverse can also happen, admittedly, where things become either harder or downright impossible in the case of bugs to obtain. I try to take changes of this nature in stride and focus on the big picture. Yes, some people will get freebies. I have gotten plenty of freebies. But there are plenty of rare drops that continue to be rare, and these are where dedication and occasionally skill have their chance to shine. So then, lastly, is any of this even a big deal in the grand scheme of things? I mean, not really. Lots of people seem to be happy whenever something like this happens. And I guess, who am I to deny them that? It's a video game. And just as it really shouldn't bother other people if they don't have whatever set of pixels they have their eyes on, it shouldn't bother me if they do. This video wasn't really meant to convince anyone. As I said earlier, I doubt that'd be likely anyway. But as my side of the fence seems to be less populated, I at least wanted to let my voice on the matter be heard. And I think I'll leave it at that because I don't want to be beating a dead horse. That was a reference to Invincible, but I can understand if you couldn't see it. And that is also an Invincible joke. I'm so funny, guys. For this week's shrine, I decided to go with Arthas Menethil, aka the main Lich King. There's been 3 of them, but you know. It only seemed fitting given that Invincible is the poster child of rare raid mounts. And for reasons I'm not going to get into here, I needed an excuse to draw Arthas sometime this year. He's definitely an example of the Warcraft design tendency of looking simple, but actually having a whole lot of stuff going on. It also didn't help matters that this is actually the first drawing I've done with my new computer, which means I had to reinstall and reconfigure my tablet software, GIMP, and OBS. So I'm really hoping everything turned out okay. And I decided to draw him in the Halls of Reflection. Obviously, the Frozen Throne itself would have been a far more iconic location, but I'm planning on using that for another future drawing. As for my thoughts on Arthas himself, I mean, he's a pretty great character. He undeniably has one of Warcraft's most compelling storylines. But at the same time, I also think he's colossally overrated. Like, the amount of people that think he is the best character ever, or that he is the best raid boss ever, and WoW died after he died, is just stupidly high. Yeah, he was a great character, but WoW has a lot of great characters. Part of it is definitely just me needing to be a contrarian, but still. And I especially have a hard time understanding people who get really upset about that Shadowlands cinematic where the last of his anima dissipates away. Like, yeah, if it was real life, no soul deserves that. But it's not like we wanted Arthas to be brought back again anyway, and at least this doesn't betray his character in any capacity. But I suppose on the flip side, there was no reason they needed to include such a scene, and I guess I would maybe be upset if it was a character I was more invested in. But I had to bring it up because apparently this is a video just about me spitting hot takes. So I'm gonna cut myself off here before I incur any more downvotes. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye bye!